Assalamu alaikum. Today we are here at Minaret Alumni Academy and we have a guest speaker, and this is NADINE JOLIE COURTNEY. She just wrote a book and we are so excited to have her here to inspire our young Muslim authors and kind of to explain what her journey has been in both finding her spiritual faith connection and then writing about it in the book. So today, welcome NADINE.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We are so excited. So stay tuned. Here we are. Let's go.
Hi. Thank you guys for having me. So I'm NADINE JOLIE COURTNEY. I am an author, and All-American Muslim Girl is my fourth book, and it's my second YA novel. But it's the first thing I've ever written that really delved into my Muslim identity, which is something that growing up I always almost kept secret, to be honest. And so I don't know if anyone has read the book yet, but the journey of my main character is very similar to my own journey, where my father is a Circassian Muslim. He's from Jordan. My grandmother is Syrian. They originally came from the Caucasus Mountains, 200 years ago. And my mother is American, and so she converted to Islam when she married my father. And so I was raised in a very sort of westernized, Americanized household where my parents didn't pray. We didn't have a Quran in the house. There was really very, very, very little religion. And my dad's family was extremely religious, so it was something that I got when I would go to visit my teta and my jiddo, but as far as my actual household, there was just no religion at all. And so I grew up in this very weird kind of in-between space where my father would tell me, "You're a Muslim," but then we would celebrate Christmas, and my mom would occasionally take me to church on Easter, and I really didn't know anything about what being Muslim meant. And so it was this very weird kind of lack of identity that I had. And then beyond that, because I'm a little bit older and was growing up in the 80s, my father would tell me, don't tell people that you're Muslim because they will judge you. It's not safe. It's something that you have to keep secret. And so, when you're a teenager and your own parent is telling you on the one hand, oh, you're a Muslim, but then on the other hand saying, but don't tell anyone, you kind of internalize the idea that it's something that is shameful or something that needs to be secret. And so that was a really, I think, damaging thing for me to grow up with. And it wasn't until I was older in my 20s and then even in my 30s that I began to claim it for myself, where I was curious, what does it mean to be a Muslim? What is this part of my identity, my heritage? And then I began, reading and studying and exploring. I took, my father refused to teach me Arabic when I was a kid, so I grew up hearing him speak it with all of his brothers and sisters and with my teta and my jiddo, but he wouldn't teach it to me at all. And so I actually hired an Arabic tutor, and I learned myself how to read and write Arabic. And so now I can speak Arabic like a 2-year-old maybe. It's very poor, but at least I can kind of understand it when other people are talking, and I can actually read it and write it, even if I don't always know what I am reading and writing, what it means. And so basically that brought me to about 10 years ago, I first came up with the idea for this book. So at that point, I had already written 2 books. One was a women's fiction book. One was a beauty guide, because I used to be a beauty editor at a magazine in New York. And I came up with the idea for this character, Ali Abraham, that was very similar to me, where she was sort of white passing. She moved through the world and people just assumed that she was, Judeo-Christian. And so people would say things to her. She was, sort of privy to microaggressions and Islamophobia and things like that because people thought that she was safe like them. They could kind of let down their guard and be bigoted. And so basically I started writing this book, and I only wrote a few pages, and then I thought, no one's going to want to read this. So I put it away, and I shelved it for about 10 years. And then fast forward to 2017 to when, Trump and the Muslim ban happened. I remember I was sitting on my couch and, watching CNN and watching the footage of these protesters at JFK, and, they're holding up signs saying, oh, we are all Muslims, and, coming out in droves, hundreds and thousands of people supporting Muslims. And this was something that I had been taught by my father would literally never, ever happen. There's no way that people are going to support Muslims. And, even if it was lip service, it was still something that to me was so powerful that I literally started crying while watching it because it was so antithetical to what I had been taught. And so I literally, that afternoon, I reopened up that old Word document. I had to search on my computer to find, where's that old folder I had of ideas from way back when? And I reopened it and I started writing All-American Muslim Girl that day. And so basically, I think as a Muslim writer, it's a very interesting time to be a Muslim writer, because on the one hand, I think that there is still obviously a lot of prejudice and bigotry and pushback out there. But on the other hand, we're living in a time now when people understand, when the gatekeepers, when editors and publishers understand that representation is really, really important. And I think also social media platforms like Twitter have given everyone kind of an equal speaking voice. And so it used to be that only the people that were, famous or powerful or had money or, were well-known writers were able to get their voices out there. But now I think there's much more of a level playing field. And so everyone can kind of take part in these various like Twitter call outs like DV Pit and things like that, where if you're a writer who's a Muslim and you want to get noticed, you have as much of a shot as anyone else, where you can get your ideas out there, you can get an agent, you can get the notice of an editor. And then beyond that, editors and publishers are really understanding that there is a market for it, that people are craving authenticity, people are craving representation. And it's amazing, over the past few years, there have actually been several Muslim authors that have made it onto the New York Times bestseller list for their YA novels, which is would have been unheard of for me, 10 years ago. And so basically, I think that there does still tend to be this notion of the one Muslim story out there. And I think that that's kind of the challenge for young writers, is obviously being an American Muslim, there's still such a wide variety of representations. And then beyond that, Muslims around the world, you have Black Muslims, you have Southeast Asian Muslims, you have, Muslims from, India and Pakistan. And I think people conflate the idea of being Arab with being Muslim. And what I think is kind of fun or a challenge is the idea of helping to explain to, a sort of a white audience that there isn't one Muslim, that there are a variety of Muslim voices and Muslim experiences. But then beyond that, I think also writing for other Muslims. And so that was a challenge that I had with this book, where I felt kind of the responsibility of making sure that I was getting my representation right. So I chose to write about a Circassian character who was very much had a story like my own, and that was the main character that I was putting out there. But then I also wanted to have a variety of other characters from her friend group, where, there's a Black American Muslim, there's someone from Southeast Asia, there's a Jordanian Palestinian Muslim, and I wanted to just kind of show the diversity within the Muslim community. And then beyond that, the diversity of thought, because I think, I've experienced this over the past year while talking about the book, especially with people that are not Muslim. And they have this notion that, all Muslims are one way. And so it's, you're going to be extremely dogmatic, and you are going to be praying 5 times a day and doing X, Y, Z, or you're completely lapsed and you are going to the bar every night and you're drinking, eating bacon. And it's they have this sort of very cliched notion of what it means to be a Muslim. It's an either, it's an or. And I think that all of these misconceptions are damaging, because it's putting Muslims in boxes. And, at different types of religions and different types of ethnicities, people are given the space to be complex. And I think that still with the stories that are out there in pop culture, we're not really seeing that for Muslims. And so that's why it's so important, I think, for people to write their story, their unique journey, their unique path, whatever it is. And also to push back against the idea that if you're not telling a story that people are expecting, whether it's from outside the Muslim community or inside of the community, it's not the right story, And so for me, it's just been kind of a balance, trying to, when I was writing this book, I had this kind of mantra of first do no harm. And I wanted to really make sure that I got not just the representation right, but that I was putting out something that wasn't at all harmful. And so with my last YA novel, sensitivity readers are a pretty big thing nowadays. And so with my last book, I think I had maybe 2 or 3 people read it. With All American Muslim Girl, I probably had 20 people read it. I paid people to read it. I had my publisher pay people to read it. There are some characters with anxiety. There's an LGBTQ character. There is a Black Muslim. There's a variety of of different kind of stories in the side characters, and I wanted to make sure that I was getting those stories right, because those stories aren't my story. And then beyond that, even though the main character hewed very closely to me and to what I grew up with and to my particular unique journey, I still had people read it, and I told them, I didn't say, oh, tell me how much you love it. I gave it to them to read and said, tell me if there's anything harmful, tell me if there's anything problematic, if there's a single word that you think is a problem, I'll change it. And so I actually, just before it was published, I heard from one of my friends who's a writer, S.K. Ali, she's a best-selling author, and she's incredible, and she finished reading the book, and she said, I loved it, it was amazing. There was literally one word that gave me pause at the very end, and I don't think it's a big deal, but it could be construed as this, and so some people, if they read it that way, they might find it problematic, but I get your intention. And I was like, I'm gonna change it. And so I literally emailed my editor, even though the book was about to be printed, and I said, I need you to change this. We need to figure out a way, because I don't want anyone to read this and to take it the wrong way and to have it be harmful. And so that's kind of, I think, the challenge with being a Muslim author nowadays, is that you are held sometimes to a higher standard, unfortunately, than non-Muslim authors, than sort of white authors. But I think that I looked at it as an exciting challenge. I looked at it as a privilege, to have my book out there, to have my voice out there. And one of the most gratifying things since publishing this book, it came out in November, has been I've heard from two very different readerships. And so I hear a lot from people that don't know a lot about Islam saying, oh my gosh, I found the book so educational, but I really enjoyed it. It didn't feel preachy, and I learned this and I learned that, and thank you for writing this book. It really kind of opened my eyes, which was partially what I wanted to do. And I think with any book, ideally you want to both entertain and maybe educate, if that's your thing. But then beyond that, I heard from countless Muslims about how they had never been seen or represented like this before, how the book meant so much to them because they'd never read anything like it, or they could relate to it, or they cried reading this part, or they loved that part. And there was one scene in particular where it takes place, basically my main character, Ali, she starts the book being very much like I was, where she's a Muslim in name only, essentially. And then over the course of the book, she decides to start practicing. She decides to start praying. She is trying to reconcile what it means to be sort of a quote unquote normal American teenager, dating and going to prom and doing things like that, with trying to strictly adhere to her religion and finding that kind of tension and that counterbalance. And so basically, over the course of the novel, she has that sort of transformation. And it was really important to me to not write a book about a character that was oppressed by her religion, but instead to write a book about a character that falls in love with her religion and sees the beauty in it and finds meaning in it. And just kind of writing about the journey that I had, that so many of my friends and cousins have had, where they are able to find something really beautiful and meaningful. And it's like, religion is a very hard thing to write about, but it meant a lot to me to be able to write a book about a girl basically running toward Islam instead of running away from it.